Alright, another video. This one is on exposure in photography. I'm going to go over the method I use to nail down exposure every time. Maybe you're new to photography, or maybe you've been shooting for a number of years and you still find yourself missing exposure. I use this method and it helps me nail down exposure pretty much every time. And I use these exact settings 95% of the time in my photography. I think if you use these settings too, you'll have some wonderful output of your images. So yeah, let's take a look at the settings I use. Alright, so today I'm going to be going over this on a Pentax, but it's similar on a Canon, Nikon, whatever you have. So first off, you need to find your metering mode. There'll be several. Some cameras have more metering modes, but this particular camera has 3, and they'll all have the similar icon on your camera. This is the one I use most often, or I use all the time, is the multi-segment. And basically it takes every part of your frame and gets the average of the light and adjusts the exposure correctly and lets your camera know, hey, this would be the correct exposure. You also have the center weighted, which just looks directly at the middle of the screen. The reason you don't want to use this one is because you might be trying to do the rule of thirds. So you might want your subject to the right or the left of the frame and not directly in the center. So it's going to be exposing for the center and not for the right or the left, and that will throw everything right off. And then of course there's a spot metering just for one particular spot as well. So the one I leave it on is multi-segmented, and this is the one I recommend to leave it on all the time. So alright, so I'm going to go over the top knob here. If you're new to photography, move out of this auto mode. You don't need to be in that. You'll learn tons by checking out these other modes, read your manual and all that good stuff. Alright, a lot of people might think logically that all photographers that have been shooting for a number of years always shoot in manual. This is incorrect. I actually shoot in AV mode, aperture value or aperture priority mode. So what this does, if you don't know, basically you set your aperture here. I'm setting, and the camera adjusts your shutter speed. So you can see here I've got f11, and then when I move it up and down, the shutter speed adjusts on the top. So with manual mode, you're having to adjust everything. You're having to adjust your shutter speed, your aperture, and also your ISO. So this cuts down on the amount of settings that you have to adjust. And the most important thing you're wanting to do is your depth of field is the most important thing. If you know that your camera's shutter speed isn't going to go down too low, well, how do you know it's not going to go down too low? You have to adjust your ISO, and you do this at the beginning before you start shooting during the day. And if you set it at the right ISO, you won't have to adjust it unless there's some dramatic change. If you're outside, some cloud cover comes in or something like that. So basically what I do is I'll set that ISO, say it's cloudy outside, I'll set it to ISO 1600, and then I'll look at keeping kind of like a bright scene and a dark scene around where I'm shooting, and adjust my aperture accordingly, or my ISO accordingly. So like say I point at a dark scene over there, and it says my shutter speed is 1/60th of a second. Well, I'm shooting maybe at most of the day I'll be shooting at 200 millimeters. I know that's a little bit too slow of a shutter speed, so I want to adjust accordingly. That lets me know when I'm shooting at 200 millimeters, I might need to move it down to, say, if my lens goes down to f4, move down to f4 so my shutter speed gets a little bit higher. It's just kind of knowing your settings on how it's going to operate there. So say you're at f4. And there you go. You're a little bit better on your shutter speed, and you could probably get away with that. But that's the low end of the scale for that 200 millimeters. Maybe if you have some image stabilization or whatnot. Also, you have to be aware if all of a sudden you're shooting something that's moving fast. You're going to need to go in there and take your aperture down so that shutter speed goes up, or maybe just bump up your ISO just for a shot or two, and then go down. So it's a very, you get used to it after a while, but if you start off by adjusting that ISO at first, I find that you don't really have to adjust it too much for the rest of the day. I'm hoping this is all making sense. If you have a question, just leave a comment below. So when does this method not work very well? Because it's all going by that metering, that spot metering, which I did at the beginning of the multi-segmented metering at the beginning of the video. So when does that not work? Say, for instance, you're taking a shot of a hawk up in a tree, and the light is behind the hawk. So obviously your camera is trying to adjust for that metering, and there's a bright scene behind the hawk, so most of the scene is brightness, and then the hawk comes out, basically a silhouette because it's too dark. So this is the other setting you could use when you're finding that. You take a picture and you know it's off. You don't have to adjust it out of this AV mode. There's a simple setting in here, and you don't have to adjust anything else. So you got everything that you want, but as far as aperture value and what, you've got your sharpest part of the lens dialed in, maybe f5.6, or what do you adjust here so you could still get a decent shot? If your ISO's up at a decent amount here, you would use this up here, exposure compensation. Now this can you see that again? That icon's going to look the same on basically every model camera. It's just that plus or minus kind of half square thing. So if you hold that down, you go down here, you say, oh wait, that bird is underexposed, I need to bring up my exposure. So you hit that and you just move it up. So this is exactly like your light meter inside your camera, if you can see there. Most cameras, it will be there in the viewfinder, and you can see as well when you hit it. So I just moved it up like a stop, a little bit over a stop, and that would help bring up the exposure so that bird wouldn't be so dark in the scene. And that's how I would adjust for that. Alright, just to recap, if any of that was confusing, just ask a question in the comments below and I'll try to get to it. But use that average metering or multi-segmented metering mode, and then also you're going to be shooting in AV mode, aperture priority mode, and change your ISO at the beginning of the day before you start shooting anything. Make sure your ISO is at an acceptable rate where your shutter speed isn't going too low for your aperture value that you picked. And also, if you need to, adjust a scene where the exposure you think is going to be off, just use your exposure compensation button up there and adjust that a little bit. I know it seems like a lot if you're new to photography, but once you get this down, I promise your exposure will be nailed every time. But thanks for watching. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Hit a thumbs up, subscribe. I have plenty of other reviews on different lenses and cameras and such, and I'll probably be doing a couple more kind of how-tos like this if you guys like it. Thanks for watching.